Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. Zionism and Israel have become the symbolic identifiers of the contemporary Jew. And yet, in spite of Israel being the Jewish state, in spite of its vast support by Jewish lobbies around the world, hardly any commentator is courageous enough to wonder what the word Jew actually stands for. So says Gilad Atzmon, my auspicious guest today. We're going to talk Judaism, Israel, from a metaphysical, philosophical, psychological perspective in a series of programs which I hope will really begin to unearth the psychology of what's going on, not just the military, not just the kind of reactionary stuff that we hear on most of the other channels. So welcome to the show, Gilad, and we're going to get right into this conversation. This question, which is quite taboo, is, of course, something that you've dealt with all your life, and you've actually been targeted and victimized for it as well. But let's kind of get to the actual nub of the issue. What is that Jewish identity today, as far as you see it?
Okay, so in order to understand what we are up against, or what is the notion that we are dealing with, we have to notice a very simple fact. Israel refers to itself as the Jewish state. It doesn't refer to itself as the Zionist state. It's the Jewish state. For most Jews, if not all Jews, Israel is the Jewish state. It decorates its airplanes, its tanks, with Jewish symbols. It refers to biblical, Talmudic, Jewish, Judaic religious segments when it called for genocide, which is very problematic. And I understood at a very early stage that we are not allowed to refer to the J word, Jews, Jewishness, Judaism. And I looked into it and I realized that instead of asking who are the Jews, or what the Jews are, or what Judaism is, which is a religious discourse, I, in a way, made a Copernican revolution of the study of this topic. And as you mentioned, I was denounced by many people, including what so-called Jewish anti-Zionists and even 22 Palestinians. Funny enough, for most of them, if not all of them, it took a genocide to understand that I was obviously right. And my revision of the topic entailed looking at this topic from an identitarian point of view. Instead of asking who are the Jews, what are the Jews, what is Judaism, what Jews believe in, I ask, what self-identified Jews mean when they refer to themselves as Jews? And this is something that for some reason no one did. And my answer was very simple. I realized that there are three main categories. Category number one are people who refer to themselves as Jews because they follow the Torah, the Talmud. They see their Jewish identity as something that is religiously oriented. And I believed at the time, and to a certain extent, I can also argue now that this is an innocent category, or at least could be an innocent category. The second category are people who refer to themselves as Jews because they have a Jewish heritage, because their grandma was Jewish, their cousin is Jewish, I don't know.
Right.
And this is also an innocent category because the fact that you have a Jewish mother, Jewish father, doesn't make you into a bad person. Absolutely not. Okay? The third category, as I define it now, and it is not exactly how I define it in my most controversial book, The Wandering Who, is people who identify politically as Jews. And my argument is that this category is never innocent because you attribute politics to biology. You identify biologically as a Jew, and it is as wrong as Hitler expecting German to identify politically with the race. By the way, it is also as wrong as a lesbian separatist expecting women to identify politically with their biology.
Right.
Okay? I find it very problematic when people are expected others to identify politically with their biology because it interferes with my universal perception of humanity as an harmonious cosmic beauty. Okay?
Right.
Okay. Now, what I didn't mention in The Wandering Who, where I define these categories, is that it's very important. These categories are not mutually exclusive. So if we, for instance, look at a settler, West Bank settler, violent guy like those whom we see now vandalizing Palestinian villages in the West Bank, awful things, devastating to watch. They obviously identify religiously as Jewish. Most of them, if not all, are religious. They definitely identify with the Jewish ancestry, and they absolutely identify politically as Jews. So we see 1, 2, and 3. When we look at Torah Jews, for instance, when we mentioned them before, the Torah Jews, the kind of rabbinical anti-Zionist Jews, they definitely identify religiously as Jews, of course, they're rabbinical. Mostly ancestry is Jewish, 99.9%. By the way, I say 99.9% because if you are not a Jew and you go through this endless process of conversion, they then accept you as a Jew.
Right.
Something that the Jewish socialists may not. Okay, because they identify racially. It's quite an amazing thing. But they don't identify politically as Jews. So their so-called anti-Zionism, opposition to the state, is driven by or guided by their understanding of their Judaic religion. If you look at anti-Zionist Jews or socialist Jews or whatever, all these kind of strange Jewish liberal groups,
Yes.
mostly secular Jews, so they don't fall into category number 1. Definitely category number 2, because if they identify as Jews but they are not, it's not because of religion, it's because of the racial identity. They have a Jewish mother, Jewish father, or whatever, and they definitely identify politically as Jews, which is the one category that is always guilty. And when I understood that, I bought myself many enemies because I understood that there was a group that is operating within us, the Palestinian solidarity enthusiasts, and they are actually mostly dedicated to diverting the issues from the debate, the discourse, from discussing what Jewishness is into Zionism. And I realized already then in 2011, 2012, maybe earlier, actually much earlier, when I was studying in Essex University, that Zionism is an empty signifier. What do we mean? Are you familiar with this notion of empty signifier?
No, not from the academic point of view.
It's a notion that was defined by a professor, Argentinian professor in Essex University. Coincidentally, I was studying in that university, but I met Leclau quite a few times. We were neighbors, but I wasn't his student. He understood that in modern politics, we create a lot of notions that mean many different things to many different people or many different groups, but they create this kind of alliances without us agreeing on the details.
Okay.
So they say the 1%, equality, social equality. Yeah, these are all pretty empty notions that a lot of groups can gather without offending each other and turn into a political campaign. And this is exactly what Zionism was. Zionism means a lot of things to many different people. It helped the Palestinians activists not being that's what they believed, not being tagged as anti-Semitic or whatever. It helped the Jews to sustain their Jewish identity, Jewish political identity. Yeah, your JVP, for instance, Jews Voice for Peace, is an exclusive Jewish group. I mean, you can donate, everyone can donate, but assuming that you are not a Jew, and I assume that you are not a Jew,
No.
you won't be able to be the chairman of this organization. And why? You are not racially qualified.
Right.
Well, theoretically, in Israel, we have Arabs in the parliament. So theoretically, an Arab Israeli can tend to be the prime minister. So Israel, the racist, genocidal Israel, is less. I'm pushing it towards an absurdum, yeah, less racist than the Jewish liberal groups. And I realized that this is something that we must touch now.
Okay.
Because we couldn't touch. Sorry, you want
yeah,
to
so
say
I want to just, there's so many, what you've said already is packed with so much kind of fascinating possibility that I want to dwell on this a little bit and at the same time not break your rhythm. You've talked about the liberal anti-Zionist Jews here. And like, of course, just to make it easier for people to be able to frame what you're saying here, maybe I should bring in a few examples. So, of course, there's people, everybody knows well. Mr. Chomsky is one of them, perhaps. There's another one that you could look at. I always forget his name. I always mix him up with Mr. Oppenheimer, but it's Finkelstein, Mr. Finkelstein. I don't know why I do. It's weird.
Atomic bomb, put him aside. If Oppenheimer made the Jewish bomb.
I know. Yeah, there's a big difference. I know, but both of them have fascinating positions on Israel, Zionism, and maybe Judaism as well. There's a third person, perhaps Ilan Pappé, who seems to have a variation of this. So there are some very prominent Jewish voices that speak about anti-Zionism and anti-Israel, and sometimes they seem to contradict themselves. Sometimes they're sort of not clear whether they want an Israel, whether they want it dismantled. Sometimes I'm not clear whether they're they regard Judaism as Zionism. Clarify that to me, because those sort of people who are the guys who are followed a lot, and they set the trend often on where this discourse is. Within the framework of the wondering who and your questions about Judaism, tell me about those three individuals. Then I maybe get a clearer handle of where you're coming from about these anti-Zionist Jews.
It is very interesting. To start with, there are three different cases. The most interesting case for me is Norman Finkelstein, and I may not agree with him on many issues, but I find him extremely honest. And this is why sometimes he gets some flack, because he says the things the way he sees them, and he's Jewish. He's Jewish, but when I listen to him, I never feel, and definitely not the late Finkelstein. Maybe in an early stage it was more problematic, but the Finkelstein of the last 5, 6, 7 years never speak as a Jew. And I, by the way, respect him way more than he respect me, because in an early stage, he used to say, my mother was, and I was maybe brutal or stupid enough to say, you're a great historian. Your arguments are so scholarly oriented, so strong, that you really don't need to use your mother as a legitimacy or a verification of the truth that you really and I think that he didn't like me saying it, and maybe it was was too brutal, because I thought, if this is the case, maybe I should send my mother to Auschwitz, and I tried, and they said no, the operation is closed now, so you have to come later. But
so you had there was a tiff. Was it a public tiff? Did you debate that publicly, or was it a private one?
No, I think that with Finkelstein, because I'm a musician, I didn't. I at the beginning of academic career, and I could see where it's going, and I didn't want to stay there. So maybe it doesn't take me seriously as a as a thinking being. But funny enough, on many issues, he and many other people who oppose me, like Blumenthal, are now speaking the way I've been speaking, for 15 to 20 years. Kind of, I would say that they adopted my line. They talk about Jewish supremacy. And a guy like Blumenthal, you didn't mention Blumenthal, but
I saw the video you put up on FB where Max Blumenthal attacks you essentially.
He denounced me
as anti-Semitic.
As anti-Semitic for saying it's not Zionism, it's Jewishness, while he himself now speak about Jewish supremacy. So he adopted my, and I don't have I don't collect royalties on thoughts, and I actually never collected a penny on speaking on these issues. I make a living making beauty. This is my profession.
Sure.
I'm an artist. Okay. Now, okay,
So that was Finkelstein. Let's bring
this
in
is
Max.
Finkelstein.
Yeah, so Max
Chomsky-
Blumenthal, you think, has shifted his position. He's a Jew, and he's obviously very anti-Zionist, very clearly anti-Jewish supremacist now. So would you align? Do you think Max is aligned with you now, basically?
I don't know. I don't expect him to say I'm an Atzmonite now. I not at all. But of course, once you identify that we have a issue with Jewish supremacy, you actually come to the core views that I've been trying to introduce for the last 26 years now.
Yeah.
And whether it's genuine or populist, I cannot tell, and it's not interesting for me. I'm a philosopher. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a theologist. I try to understand, to analyze the meaning of certain ideologies as they appear to us.
So what does that Ilan Pappé, for instance, have ideologically?
Okay.
You talked about yourself refraining from criticizing Judaism as a religion, and instead you say you confront different interpretations of the Judaic code. Do people like Pappé and Finkelstein have anything to do with that kind of perspective, or are they just completely political and secular in that sense about it?
With Ilan Pappé, I had a clear confrontation, and I can even tell you about it if you insist.
Yes,
but I never spoke about it publicly. But I differentiate between Ilan Pappé in his Israeli period, which I thought was a relatively good historian or chronologist, more than an historian, a chronologist of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And I'm way less impressed with his contribution once he moved to Britain, and it's not entirely his fault, which I must say before I criticize him, because this criticism may be unfair, because he had to leave Israel, if I understand it correctly, because of political issues. And he settled in Exeter University. And once you are part of British academia, you are banned from telling the truth as you see it,
right?
Which is the very, very big problem. And I think that what happened to him then, and I hope that I don't offend him or anyone by saying it, because a lot of people believe in this in the terminology that he introduced. We started to look for models, historical models, that explain Zionism as a repeated materialist historical procedure.
I see.
Turning a blind eye to the uniqueness of the Jewish project. So, and I think that Ilan Pappé in the center of it. So, for instance, we started to look at Israel as an apartheid. Apartheid is a system of racial exploitation. Israel doesn't want to exploit the Palestinians. It wants them gone. It's an ethnic cleansing philosophy. It's
Fascinating.
a racist philosophy. It is something that provoked the thinking of Hitlerian thinking. Okay? So we try to pick up to put it into the apartheid. And we actually, by doing that, let them get away with a slow genocide that turned into a real devastating genocide. In fact, the worst genocide, documented genocide in world history. This is something that we did in our discourse by not referring to the J and coming with all these kind of wishy-washy models. Apartheid is why we like apartheid, because apartheid always is a post-apartheid. So it gave the feeling that we are moving maybe towards a reconciliation. What reconciliation? You don't need Gilad Atzmon to tell you that the Israeli society is becoming more radical to the point that 90%, more than 90% of it's like 80% of the Israelis supported the war in Iran, but 20% of the Israelis are Arab. So we are talking about nearly 100% of the Israelis support the war in Iran, and the same numbers support this full destruction of Lebanon.
Is that because they're becoming more radical, more conservative in their Judaism, or is it because they genuinely have been fed the information, some would say propaganda, that Iran and Lebanon pose an existential threat to the state of Israel? Is it a move towards a kind of a purist, conservative, radical Judaism, or is it simply a political fear of a power which is rising, which will challenge their processes, whatever they've been doing?
Each of these questions deserve hours of discussion. But if I have to make it very short and elegant, the concept of Zionism, and I want to remind your listener what was the concept of Zionism that doesn't exist anymore, was based on the acceptance of the anti-Semitic criticism of the Jews as non-proletarian, as capitalist, abusive, and so on and so on. They say it's not because we are really bad people, it's because we don't have a land. So once we go to our historic land, I'm not advocating it, I'm just presenting what it is.
Sure.
and
Of course.
Once we go to our historic land, we will turn into very nice people. And first Hebrews, so to say, believed in it. But a lot of things happened. One thing that happened was the Holocaust, for instance. So a lot of Jews came after the Holocaust or ran away from Germany, not just from Germany, but from Poland. They could see the danger coming in Europe or whatever. And they were not necessarily, they didn't necessarily subscribe to this ideology of making the Jew into something, a new civilized proletarian and so on and so on. After 48, they brought a lot of Arab Jews, and they used some horrendous tactics to convince them that Israel is their place. They were not part of the Zionist ethos, and their understanding of it, or the way they integrated into it, made them actually quite abusive, most of them, towards the Palestinians. And it's a very interesting topic, anthropologically, sociologically, but I don't want to get into it. So what I'm trying to say, and I promise to be short and elegant,
Sure.
is that Zionism was a radical identitarian philosophy that was short-living And what we see now is that Jews, we see a revival not of Jewishness, but a revival of Judaism in Israel. Israel becoming more and more Jewish and now Judaic, because Jewishness and Judaism are philosophies that have been developing for 2,500 years. They have a lot to offer in terms of self-perception, yourself as part of the community, and they have way more to offer than Zionism, regardless of the crime that Zionism committed even against Jews from Arab countries. It's a lot. I try to push a lot of topics into kind of a small segment, but basically, the fact that Israel become more radical, more barbarian, less shy about its criminality, is because it is consistent with the self-perception of themselves as Jews living in their Jewish state, in their historic land.
Right.
And this is why the J, understanding the J, is a fundamental perspective that we must not be shy of, not just for the Palestinians, only for the Jews as well. For the Jews as well, because if we are afraid to deal with it, they operate with impunity. And this is exactly what we see.
Sure. So this uniqueness of the approach that you have strikes me as being, it's encapsulated in what you say in The Wandering Who. It says, although you restrain yourself from criticizing Judaism, the religion, instead you confront different interpretations of that Judaic code, and you deal with Jewish ideology, Jewish identity politics, and the Jewish political discourse, and you ask what being a Jew entails. Now, in what way is that different from?
It's very important.
Sure.
In The Wandering Who, and I'll make it short. In The Wandering Who, I thought that Judaism can be equated. And in the last segment, that our last discussion, I said, that the Torah Jews present a coherent and consistent Judaic approach, but they are around 100,000 rabbinic,
a small minority
Jews, very small minority out of 15 million Jews, and the dominant Judaic school in the Jewish state is actually owning a very different perception, and they are also motivated by their understanding of the Judaic cause. So Judaism can be presented as not as ethical, but ethically oriented precept. But we have Judaism as a whole cannot be equated.
Interesting.
Cannot be vindicated.
And how does this approach differ from a lot of the commentators you were talking about? You talk about, I guess, this idea of the metaphysical, the spiritual, and the socio-political connotations of being a Jew. Is it relevant to a kind of a state which is essentially rooting its identity now on a theocracy of sorts, isn't it, really? And if it is adopting the Jewish religion or the Judaism as its core raison d'etre or objective, then how does that affect all these other guys who are who also don't want to condemn Israel? Because I get the sense with some of these commentators, even the anti-Zionists, they still want to maintain Israel. They're not. They might still talk about the two-state solution. They may talk about re-engineering the mindset of the Jews in Israel. Unpack that a little bit for me, Gilad.
Yeah, to start with, the Jews who want to maintain Israel as a Jewish state are, if they are living overseas, I don't want to say the diaspora because diaspora entails that that Israel is the Jewish homeland, or overseas, not in Israel. They are what we call Zionism, and if they kind of mildly support the Palestinians, we have a name for them. They are called anti-Zionist Zionists, as AZZ.
Right.
Okay, out. In Israel, we see very few people, and I'm talking about probably hundreds, to be if I'm kind of optimistic, who call for the collapse of this Jewish state principles, the principal state, and I'm not even sure. Okay, few of them call for a one-state solution,
Right.
and of course, I was very welcoming for this concept. And then I was invited for one conference, and I got everyone kind of try everyone. I got everyone upset because I said, "Listen, the concept of one state and harmony is beautiful, but we don't even have a word in Hebrew for peace, reconciliation, and harmony." The word shalom, that I'm sure that you and probably most listeners heard before, shalom in modern Hebrew doesn't mean peace, reconciliation, or reconciliation. It means security
Right.
for the Jews. Okay? So when they have shalom talks, they always ask for what about engaging in security, securing our borders. Okay? Shalom is shalom. Peace is something different. Reconciliation is that we learn to love each other. And I realized that unless this concept is this concept finds its roots into the Judaic Hebraic discourse, we are not going anywhere. I said it. I tell you now, it was 15 years ago, and as you can see, the discourse of one state didn't go anywhere, and none of the speakers, the keynote speakers on this conference, is still trying to push it. And Ilan Pappé was one of them. They are engaged in populist. I show you the concept for Ilan Pappé, for instance, of apartheid. One state, it's an empty signifier. Apartheid is an empty signifier. We have plenty of empty signifiers, notions that are there to unite all parts of the discourse without really looking to the beast in the eye.
Right.
In the eyes.
Well, you talk about also, and this is finally, because we're going to carry this on in a second program, because I want to come on to Christian Zionism and the evolution of that, but that's a separate strand. We'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
And other aspects of why the Israeli state and America, etc., are what they are and the relationship they have. That's another issue. But in terms of the original Zionists, you talk about their vision being exactly, in a way, what's being done today, which is that Jewishness is the key element and the fundamental characteristic of their being, of the being of a Jew. Any other quality to them, you say, is secondary. You also say this is exactly the message the early Zionists were interested in promulgating, and now you've got it. So what is Jewishness? There's Jew, there's Jewishness, and then there's being...
A great question.
Right.
This is a very important question. Very, very important question, because we have to learn to differentiate between Jews, Judaism and Jewishness.
Right.
Jews are the people, and we already spoke about people identify Jews, and we define the category. Judaism is the religion. Jewishness is the ideology. This
Right.
is why, because of Jewishness, a person can say, I'm a Jew, but I'm not religious. You cannot say I'm a Muslim, but I'm not religious. If you're not a Muslim, if you're not a Muslim, and let's say that you are an Arab or Pakistani, so you're Pakistani, you are an Arab, you are Turkish. If you are American and you're not a Christian, let's say, so you're American, or whatever, from New York. But you can be a Jew without having any spiritual or religious connection with Judaism, because Jews, especially following the Enlightenment, went through a process of assimilation, which is a very interesting topic in itself. And within this process of assimilation, they dropped God, which they could do because they invented God. They invented a God, a deity figure that loves them more than anyone else. They dropped God, but they kept chosenness. They kept the supremacy. Yeah? And if Zionism was the dream to get Jews rid of the supremacy, to make them proletarian, a label Zionism, it took them 2 weeks in Palestine to realize that working is nice, but the Arabs are cheaper. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So what happened is that the supremacy was left there. And if you ask me, there is something, I kind of criticized liberal Jews and anti-Zionist Jews, but there is something that I have to say. It is, of course, legitimate for Jews to say, listen, I'm a Jew, but I hate what is happening in Israel. This is absolutely legitimate. The problem starts when they start to dominate the discourse and to dominate the terminology and to tell you what you cannot talk about. This is the problem. This was my problem. This was what Max Blumenthal tried to do to me. He said, I signed that Gilad is smoking about Jewishness. We want to speak. We Jews, we the Palestinians want to talk about Zionism. No. Okay. The thing is that Jewishness is different forms of supremacy. So you can be supremacist because we are the Jews in the movement. There is a famous Jewish figure in British Jewish anti-Zionism, Nomi Idrissi Wimburn, and she always speaks, we, the Jews in the movement, believe that. You're Jews in a pro-Palestinian movement, you have to be slightly more humble. This is thing that is very important. Can you imagine an anti-Nazi movement in the 40s operating in England?
Yes.
And there are some Germans who oppose Hitler, and they say, listen. You can, we are Aryans, and we don't allow you to talk about Aryanism or whatever. This is exactly what they do. It's a Jewish state, and the Jews don't allow us to talk about, it's impossible. This must come to an end because we had a genocide. I partially blame us for the genocide, for letting them get away with impunity, and this impunity was created with their impunity. It was created by the fact that we never dared talking about their most obvious symptoms, cultural, ideological, that are J-driven.
Well,
It's very bad.
I'm going to conclude our conversation because we have done the journey. You write again in The Wandering Who about Weizmann, one of the early Jewish Zionists, and he talked about Jewishness, and you say he was unique in. You say it was a unique quality that stopped the Jews from assimilating.
I think that we have to summarize Weizmann's philosophy into one sentence, he said, there are no French Jews, American Jews,
Right.
English Jews. There are Jews who live in France, Jews who live in America, Jews who live in Britain. For him, Jewishness was a primary quality. Now, when you call yourself Jewish Voice for Peace, you try to tell me that your Jewishness is a primary quality. If you are, and I have a problem with it, if you are a peace lover who happen to be a Jew, you are my ally. You are my friend. I will do everything to protect your right. If you are a supporter of Palestine who happen to be a Jew, no problem. And this is a very crucial issue. Once you see your Jewishness as a primary quality, you are a textbook Weizmannian Jew, Zionist, and this is why we call them anti-Zionist Zionists.
Right. And you quote Jabotinsky, again, a major figure within early Zionism. And you say, he says, a Jew brought up among Germans may assume German customs, German words.
Yeah.
He may be wholly imbued with that German fluid, but the nucleus of his spiritual structure will always remain Jewish because his blood is, his body, his physical, racial type are Jewish. That's the basis of a kind of an alienation from any other culture or race or people that they are living with.
Of course. Of course. And you just answered the question that you raised, and I failed to answer 10 minutes ago. You asked me, how is it that it's taking over this kind of Judaic? And Jabotinsky gave us the answer. Because this is how they see themselves. They see that there is a nucleus. Whether there isn't such a nucleus or not, I don't know. But it's very appealing for them to identify with the thought that such a nucleus exists. Right. This is very important. And this is why Jabotinsky's party, the Likud party, as you know, are kind of driven, following Jabotinsky philosophy, is the domineering political party in the Jewish state since 77. And it was the victory of the Likud in 77 that signals the final end of labor Zionism. So if Zionism died in 48, but kind of there were some reminiscence that continued through 67 to 77, in 77 it was kaput.
Right. Well, as ever, Gilad, you've given us a fascinating journey into a kind of a mindset, an ideology, a thinking, which very few people actually really understand, I believe. I mean, it's certainly education for me. And I think it's important to understand the mindset of Jews, Judaism, and Israel if we're going to come to any real solution other than the military one, which seems to be being rolled out now, whether it's the axis of resistance or Iran or anybody else who's basically had enough of this manifestation of Jewishness as we see in Israel? Because you'd argue it's not Zionism, I know, and you'd say it's a kind of a perversion of Jewishness, perhaps. Well, it's another. So your final conclusion about maybe the possibilities of a solution to this, if there is any.
To start with, we like to think that there is a solution. I think that I got involved with all of it initially because I thought that I could see some things that may throw light on the problem. And it took me a very short time to realize that there was no and there is no room for a dialogue. It's not a culture that welcomes negotiation, and unfortunately, their hegemony of the Jewish left within the Palestinian discourse for years infected the Palestinian solidarity movement with the same disease. So when Finkelstein says something that they don't like, they call for his expulsion. When I pointed they call for my expulsion,
Yes.
when 22 Palestinians wrote this letter for disavowment, Gilad Atzmon, disavow Gilad, it took me a week later to read about the Jew who engineered this letter. I'm not so sure that I will say it in the most in the clearest form. I don't believe that there is a collective solution to the so-called Jewish problem. I am very impressed with early Zionist thinkers, agitators that were very precise in identifying the problems. And I can, if you want, we can have kind of one meeting and we can talk about those important texts. I will even prepare myself so I don't forget anything.
Sure.
They saw the problem. The diagnosis was spectacular. The therapy proved to be a total catastrophe. I do believe that there is room for personal solution. If you are not happy with it, in the middle of the night, you leave the ghetto. You don't make too much fuss about it because they will chase you and you disconnect.
So Israel being the ghetto.
Israel is a ghetto, and it's the worst ghetto ever. And and this is exactly the failure of Zionism, because Zionism was born to let the Jew out of the ghetto, and they built the worst ghetto ever. And it's a disaster. But you can leave the ghetto. And then, by the way, Golders Green is also a ghetto. Endon is a ghetto. Brooklyn has few ghettos. And there are Jews who are living. They say, okay, I had enough. I want to live. I want to be a normal human being. And this can be done. This can be done. But there is no collective. There cannot be a collective. Essentially, there cannot be a collective to the Jewish problem, for the simple reason that if you identify as a Jew, you have to identify racially, politically, and the next thing is a form of supremacy. This is very tragic, but this is what it is.
We're going to carry on this conversation. It's not going to end. It's not going to end until we find a real solution to this. But Gilad, you contributed amazingly. Thank you so much for your contribution today. Thank you for watching this edition of Deep Dive Perspective. Do like, share, and thank our channel. We need your support, I'd say financially as well now, because we're at that stage where after a year, Deep Dive Perspective is still being censored. We are being held back. So monetizing us is a problem for a lot of these sites because they're controlled, again, by the usual suspects. Unfortunately, that's the reality we live in. So we have to turn to you. So please do donate. There are facilities to do that. Do support Gilad's work. He's available across Facebook and it's very easy to find him. Do support his work and support all those people who are speaking up, speaking the truth and are justice orientated and want a world which is peaceful and just. That's all we want. Thank you for watching this edition of Deep Dive Perspective. Thank you, Gilad. Until the next show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.